Namaskar and welcome to this exciting episode of Sattology, debunking mythology. Sattology means science of truth or study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology, which means science or study of fake lie or imagination. Don't use mythology for ancient histories, native histories, even if it is not recorded according to the European standards. Whether you're in Mexico, you're in India, the natives are the Hindus. Even Pakistan, Bangladesh, the natives are the Hindus. Yeah, Burma also to some extent, Afghanistan also to some extent. Don't every single folklore that you think of in your area, research it. You'll find something of it and then build on it. And because this is the way to do it. And the histories of Ramayana and Mahabharata have a lot of instances of proof. In fact, I went all the way to Peru to prove that the Sugriv Sena went there based on one or two shloka and the directional instructions of Sugriv to his Sena, to his armies, when they went out under Bhagwan Ram's leadership to search for Sita. So, if I was able to do that in Peru, which is Udaigiri, according to Valmiki Ramayana, you can do much more than that in where you are, wherever you are. So, check out my book on that, Ramayana, Global Footprint of Ramayana. I have very, very special guest today, and we are trying to understand the UFO sightings all over the world. It's a very pet topic for me. I did not know that the guest who has come on many times in the show, he's been studying that since childhood. So let us welcome Shri Kom Kopati. Kapati.
Welcome,
Kapati.
welcome to all. Carpentier.
Kapati. Again. So I did not know that, Kom, about you, this one, because this is like a pet topic for me. This is one of the people I feel I always laugh at the Americans and all the Europeans that why are you so surprised? I mean, what is there to, what can you do actually to protect yourself? Nothing. Their technologies are far more advanced, and by the time you even try to catch them, they disappear. So before I start off on that, I want to give you a background of what is happening during the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, 90s, and now on this phenomena, especially the UFO, unidentified flying objects, or UAPs nowadays, unidentified aerial, I don't know what is that, piece,
Phenomena.
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 So, can you give a synopsis over the last 3 or 4 decades on what is happening and how the cameras have advanced and now people are getting more pictures now?
It will have to be a very brief summary, Aditya, because as you know, the topic is huge. Just on the internet, you have millions of pages. There must be at least 12,000 books written on the subject, many of which are written from a scientific perspective by very credible authors coming from a number of disciplines. But to be very concise, I would like to update you by saying there are three topics nowadays, three subjects which have achieved a level of maturity that makes them in some way converge and coincide. The first one is the one that you are the closest to personally, which is what you call Sattology, or what other people call mythology, which is the ancient lore of many traditions and most parts of the world. But in your case, of course, you are referring primarily to Indian Sattology or mythology. And the interesting meaning of mythology is that it doesn't necessarily mean falsity. It means it can be something that's not real from the materialistic standpoint, in the sense from the perspective of history as we understand it, you know, which has a certain sociological and political context in which dates are all important and where you just have to try to rationalize everything according to our current knowledge level. But otherwise, mythology, as Plato said, is the truth which is higher than the mundane truth, because it refers to a higher plane of reality. Now, in the case of Indian mythology, as of many other mythologies or Sattologies, you know that there are many beings coming from many different planets and many different planes or levels of existence, levels of reality. And these beings are diversely known as devas or devatas, asuras, rakshasas, and then you have lower levels, if you may call them that way, like apsaras, and you also have the Gandharvas, who are musical beings led by Narada, who is very specifically said to come from another plane of reality. And in the Indian classics, in the Puranas and in the Mahabharata, you are told about the palaces of the gods, which are in heaven, as we generally understand that, which in fact means that they are on different levels, higher than the human plane, and therefore only visible in certain situations, either when they decide to show themselves or when we acquire superior perceptive abilities, which enable us to sight them, to view them. And this was supposed to be, of course, purely imaginative or coming from sort of religious superstition. But now we have a better and better understanding of what those ancient rishis and, like Vedavyasa, meant when they talked and wrote about all that superior reality and about the 7 levels of existence above ours, which are called the Viharitis, and the 7 lower levels, which are called Patalas, and which are defined by different levels of vibration in which beings exist, and they can sometimes cross over from one plane to another, and they can visit our plane of existence and become visible sometimes, not always, and then move out of it. So that's something which now is becoming much more credible from a perspective of scientific understanding of how reality is built. And that brings me to the second of the 3 themes or fields that I wanted to evoke briefly today, which is the recent realization in physics that our world is not at all what it seems to be. When I mean our world, I mean the universe as a whole. And of course, it's been a long time that scientists have debated how the world is built, right? I mean, you had, right from the 1920s, you had 2 different schools of physics. You had the Einsteinian school, which claimed that everything is real, and that all objects have their own independent existence. And of course, we may perceive or not perceive them, but that does not affect the level of their reality. Facing that school of thought, you had a rival one, which was probably started by the Danish physicist Niels Bohr, one of the founders of quantum physics. And Niels Bohr, in fact, was convinced that nothing existed separately and independently and had its own independent reality. Everything was tied and connected together to the extent that if one thing did not exist, nothing existed, and anything taken apart from everything else would simply not exist. So that's a bit difficult to understand because it's counterintuitive, but there are very clear and very convincing physical demonstrations of it. And in particular, there was that theory which was created in the 1970s by a physicist called Bell, and it's called the Bell theorem. And Bell hypothesized that anything that is considered material, and that includes energy, in the universe has a completely interlocked relationship with everything else, which means that anything that happens anywhere in the cosmos, however infinite the cosmos may appear or be, everything else will be impacted by it. And that theory was considered physically logical. In fact, you couldn't really make sense of the universe if you didn't accept it, but it wasn't provable until recently, when 3 physicists who got the Nobel Prize this year, 2022, Clausen, Aspect, and Zillinger, found a way to prove, at least in terms of physics, which is not necessarily what we understand as proof in our day-to-day lives, they found a way to prove that indeed the universe does not exist independently of the perception we have of it. So in a sense, the universe is a perception game, and maybe go as far as saying that the universe is a creation of the minds, not only our mind individually, but the cosmic mind to which we belong, in which we move. So that makes the universe, in a sense, a sort of a 3D computer game, or probably a much multi-dimensional virtual reality. And people like Elon Musk, who is not a scientist as such, has said it quite clearly, and in a way he has said it to hundreds of millions of people who are his followers, So it's becoming mainstream. So you see the two things. On the one hand, we have a mythological or sattological knowledge, which is now becoming scientifically acceptable. And on the other, we have a scientific evidence that the universe is in fact a multiverse, which is a projection of something else that we cannot really perceive, but that through meditation we can feel, because we are part of it at the deepest level of our consciousness. And this brings me to the third aspect of the reality we are essentially now living in, which is the UFO or UAP phenomenon, which has been proven and proven again for the last 80 years at least, and which has been every time denied or at least obfuscated by political and scientific agencies, which had an agenda and which still have the agenda of trying to keep people unaware of it. At the private level, many of the top scientists, politicians, and decision makers will privately acknowledge that there is indeed a ufological reality, and that there are beings and craft that we do not understand, at least at the official level, but which are there and which are much more powerful than we could ever be in the foreseeable future. And just yesterday, the former head of French intelligence, Mr. Juillet, has said that UAPs come from other worlds and they are piloted by intelligent beings who are much more advanced than we are. And he is one of the innumerable very high-level officials who have confessed to this. So the question is, why is there still that official level of doubt that you can't, you keep feeling? People will say, well, it looks very odd. I don't think it's real. We have no proof. Maybe something is there, but what is it? We don't know. And then you have professional debunkers, some of whom are paid by the government or by certain private entities. And they are paid to actually keep saying, no, no, you people are crazy. There is nothing like that. It's impossible. We can always explain it. It must be the Russians, it must be the Chinese, it must be maybe the US secretly, but there is nobody else on this in this region of the universe. So it has to be some of us, or else it's not there. So all that is where we are now. But as you know, the US Pentagon was practically compelled last year by Congress to come up with some updated report about what they know. And of course, the Pentagon dragged its feet. They, as usual, tried to divert the issue. They issued a very brief report, which I think was only 11 pages, which came out last year and which basically acknowledged that there were a number of phenomena and sightings that we couldn't explain. But when they were essentially confronted with the fact that they knew a lot more than what they were letting out, they took privately some of the congressmen and senators into a closed room and told them, we're going to show you some films, but you are under, you are not allowed to say what we tell you, and you are not allowed to give any details about the films we will show you. And so they were essentially under a gag order, and they still are. But some of those congressmen have spoken, and congresswomen have spoken, and said that what they saw shook them to the core of their beings, because it was so striking and so unmistakable. You know, those films go on for half an hour, and you see from very close quarters craft and beings that are, of course, completely unlike what we are able to produce and operate. The other interesting aspect of this is that there is increasingly an admission that the US government, among others, has kept some material remains of those craft and of the beings which pilot them, who pilot them. And of course, this was known and alleged. It came out on various occasions in the media back in the 1950s, but it was every time shut down and people were basically told to look elsewhere. And most people eventually forgot about it, except a few experts who have been working in the field. So we are dealing with a very complex reality with beings coming from many different planes. And it's very interesting that California was in some way a cradle for not only for contemporary physics and not only for a better, as it were, a better understanding of the science which could give us the technologies that we now are developing, such as quantum computing, they also very early in the early 20th century, in the 20th century, there were a few very prominent Californian occultists, as they were often called, who worked on secret knowledge, so-called divine knowledge or esoteric knowledge, and on extraterrestrial or superhuman beings who were visiting us and were giving messages to them. There are some very well-known names in that list. Many people in California remember P. Manly Hall, who was a great occultist based in San Diego. I think he was between San Diego and Los Angeles. Then you have the famous American Polish spiritual teacher and mystic George Adamski, who founded a school of Indian and Tibetan esoteric wisdom in the 1930s, and who became at some point I would call him the apostle of a great meeting between humans and extraterrestrials from Venus, who had come to visit him and who had given him a number of secret and privileged data about the history of the world and about the future of mankind. And Adamski became so famous that he was received by presidents, prime ministers, kings and queens, by the Pope. He was seen as a very genuine representative, or at least contact, of these superior intelligent beings. And there is another very interesting man also from San Diego area who has been practically forgotten now, but who had a big influence. His name was Lane Mead. And Lane Mead was an occultist and esotericist, and he had, for the first time in the 40s, talked about what he called the Etherians, beings who come from an etheric plane of existence and who can materialize in order to become visible and connect with us and teach us, humans, a knowledge which otherwise is not accessible to most of us. And it's interesting that Lane Mead, apparently was connected to that first memo that was recorded by the FBI, which is the 1947 memo, 8th of July. It's called the 6751 memo, which talks about, it's an agent of the FBI who is saying he got a report from a military officer about an etheric craft which had come down on Earth and which was crewed by some very tall beings of light. And that memo is, of course, in the FBI archives, and it's gone on the internet in the last several years, and it's attracted millions of eyeballs, because it is an authentic document, whether or not some people claim that the FBI might have been misled. The fact is that the document is there. Then there was another memo of the FBI, which is called the Hotel Memo, which is from 1950. And that memo is also very interesting because it talks about the Roswell crash and about the small beings who were recovered and who died, except for one. Of course, that's become a sort of a folk story now. But it's very well known that G. Edgar Hoover, the founder and first director of FBI, was totally not only fascinated by UFOs, but he knew that the Air Force, at that time, first it was called the Army Air Force, and then it became the Air Force, as well as the Navy, were deeply involved in research on UFOs. And he wanted to know more. But of course, there was a keen rivalry between the services, and the FBI was not made privy to much of the information. So this is a very long prologue, but it's just to show you that we are now at a point where all the official knowledge in a way converging to tell us that human beings are a very small and probably very primitive species in the universe, and that we are surrounded by forces and intelligences that are far greater than us, but which some of them at least have an interest in us and are probably helping us, while others are much more suspicious and probably should be looked at with caution, because they may not be well-intending and they may have purely selfish motivations. purely operational, and they may not care at all about our welfare or our lives, which is something that seems to come out from quite a number of experiences that people have lived all over the world with some of those beings. So that's in as few words as possible where I would like to place the topic right now.
Very well summarized. I think in few words you summarized, and you're so comfortable in talking, which shows just your lifetime of experience observing this phenomena. I was studying the Sumerian cultures, and also I was studying for my Ramayana research and the global footprint of Ramayana. I was studying all these cultures. There is one thing very common, that somebody came from somewhere else and gave them the guidance to build large pyramids. Very common across these cultures. Egyptian pyramids, and pyramids are now found in Antarctica also, which is now all this. The only best documented source for all this information is the Sanskrit books, histories like Ramayana, Mahabharata, where these things are documented very well. And also there are restrictions put, like in today's age of Kali Yuga, the Daitya, which means the much bigger and kind of negative personalities or people who can destroy other people, they are forbidden to come on the planet Earth in Kali Yuga. Forbidden. So therefore, after Dwapar Yuga, or after when the Krishna passed away, Krishna left this planet, there are no instances like that, because there is a global management which is going on. And Ramayana Mahabharata explains about Indra being controlling that global movement of people, so it is not to damage the life on Earth and affect it in any way. So you will not find any of these people interfering in any lives directly. And you will not see that somebody coming on the Houston and stopping the sunlight for some time. They can do that very well if they want to, but they won't do that because there is somebody stopping them. Uh, I was very interestingly, you mentioned about some people who can disappear in thin light. It's a yogic science. You can experience in Kumbh Mela also. Kumbh Mela also, if you go, you can experience that some yogis can disappear right in front of your eyes. I have experienced it one time and few years back, and I cannot explain to many people how that happened. But I met that yogi later on the other side of the Ganga. So it does happen in some places. And the in the Peru, Candelabra, Paracas, which is the place mentioned in Valmiki Ramayana as the boundary of the eastern direction. There, every day, those Yagya Vedika symbol is made in sand. That mountain is a mountain of sand. Like in most of the Peruvian mountains are sand mountains on the coast side. Internal, when you go towards Andes more, then yes, you get more stable mountains which are built on, which are again built of sand. But then now the plantation is there. Not few rock, very few rock formations are there, which is particularly in the south side, where more rocks are there, where the Machu Picchu and other places, Cusco is there, other places are there, and that's where the mountain goes up further up and reaches the peak. Now, one thing which people are surprised till date, I recorded in my video, is coming out also. Numerous sun temples all over the place, which obviously some religious people as well as some archaeologists have hidden it. And they are whitewashing it as they are curating those sites. And those inscriptions are very clearly in Brahmi script, not in Devanagari, but Brahmi script. Some places I even found traces of Brahmi script, which I'm still trying to verify. Now, this phenomenon of Candela Paracas, every morning that those Yagya Vedika symbol get further engraven, all the sand is removed automatically. And people are not able to explain that why it is happening. But in Valmiki Ramayana, it is mentioned that Siddha and Charana are the people who are perfected beings, and they maintain these symbols mentioned in Veda, so that the geographical marking on the earth is kept aside. Like, for example, somebody is flying in and they know on the top of the mountain, now they've reached here. Similarly, there is a symbol on Astachal, which is Alps mountains. And I'm going to search that and I'm going to document it one time. I'll wait for some divine inspiration and something like that has to happen. So these things are very commonly mentioned. Like, for example, Hanuman telling Bhim that in today's time, the height has reduced significantly. He's telling him that Manushya means humans look like small pygmies now. And Rockwell, now I'll bring it back to US, Texas, in Rockwell. Rockwell is a city in the northeast of Texas. It's a small city. The walls which were discovered under the city are approximately 70 to 80 feet high. Now nobody has to build a boundary wall of 70, 80 feet unless they are of that height. And it is looks like it's a large area, almost like a uh, 10 miles by 10 miles or something like that. And so these things are being found, and the realization is also coming in that these people had better technologies and they had bigger heights also. But it is a very common knowledge in Vedas, Purana, Ramayana, Mahabharata. Nobody questions that. Like Indra coming down to meet various rishis while Bhagwan Ram is looking, and Bhagwan Ram is explaining to Lakshman that look at the Indra, he's coming in his own plane, Aravat, and making such a huge noise. The plane is making such a huge noise, and very casually being explained, and nobody is surprised, no rishi is surprised. And I'll put a counter viewpoint that people are surprised that somebody else is coming. I'm talking about general people, not people like you who have been observing that, and also scientists in San Diego, and I'm going to research on them. I'll take the names. I'll go and meet their departments, if they have any departments in the universities here. So the people are surprised because they've been told that they are able to manipulate the earth's resources and other things, and now they cannot because they have someone superior. And in the Mahabharata, Raman very clearly mentioned that you cannot exploit the earth beyond a certain level because it is Indra who is controlling it. So at a certain level they will intervene if they have to. They will intervene to protect the earth. Like for example, they have the powers to even nullify a nuclear weapon if they have to, because they want to protect the humanity. It's not about hurting us. If they have to hurt us, they have bigger technology than us in any way. They can revive us out completely, but they won't do that. So the idea of them or the extraterrestrials or people of superior intelligence than us being always harmful to us is also not correct. And that is also with some kind of political motive or insecurity. Some kind of insecurity is there for some things which have not been seen. So, but the people who were living in these lands, Europe and USA, for older times, look at the pyramids in Mexico, look at the pyramids under the Amazon jungles, look at the whole cities under Amazon jungles, which have been found out now. And much better design and much more scientific and much more vast. Like in Peru, the Pachacamac temple, the video is going to come out next week, is spread around 600 acres and with a very accurate scientific measurement of sun's movement throughout the day. Yeah. So my question to you is that a lot of information is already covered in our ancient texts, and Ramayana and Mahabharata belong to the whole world, not just for India or Hindus, because they have descriptions about the whole planet. Especially Ramayana has that. So the why is that people we are negating such important source of information and trying to go become insecure or spread insecurity. Like the area 51, I went outside and I was about to be shot out. I had to stay at least 200 meters away from the wall. So no, there was a warning given to me. They said, stay away. I was just with the camera.
Yeah. No, I mean, Area 51 has been very closely guarded. And as you know, even US presidents have been denied access, to the point that in the last month of his presidency, President Eisenhower, who had basically, you might say, started the process of, I would say superficially, it looks like observation of the UFO phenomenon, but it was deeper than that, because there is increasing evidence that he met a delegation from another plane in 1954 at Edwards Air Force Base in California. And the meeting took place with a few officials. And according to that discussion, it was agreed that there would be joint scientific work carried out between certain agencies of the US government and the visitors, but it had to be kept secret. And there is a very interesting episode when a few very high-level officials were taken later to that base, to Edwards, which was called Murok at the time. And they were shown five craft, which had been left as sort of samples, goodwill, by the visitors. And the agreement had been made apparently that 2 weeks later, there would be a public announcement from the President of the United States to the world about this contact. And that never took place. It was canceled, apparently on the insistence of the General Defense Staff, on the basis of the fact that this was a major strategic challenge, and that if the Soviets were to get access to that, then they could also derive enormous advantage from it. And so it was critical to keep whatever knowledge could be gained exclusively for the use of the US military. And what happened as a result is not entirely clear, except that it looks as if the government lost control. It was taken over by some major private defense companies, such as Lockheed and a few others, and Hughes Aircraft and all, and they did their own thing, which was only for money making. And as a result, probably a lot of that cooperation never took place. And in fact, it's very interesting that one of the conditions for the cooperation was that the US and the world should renounce nuclear military technology. And that, of course, was never done because the military insisted that this was national security and you could not compromise. So obviously, there was a lack of trust, or at least from the earthly side, there was a sense that there is a lot to be gained here, but let's not show our hand. Let's not give up whatever we can get for ourselves. And the typical human considerations. So back to what you were saying, there are, of course, very telltale monuments all over the world, which cannot be rationalized in terms of our current technology and science, because when you see that some of the stones that were put together were cut, transported, and put together to make these monuments, as in Baalbek in Lebanon, some of those single stones in granite weigh more than 1,000 tons. Now, how do you carry 1,000 tons across terrain and mountains after cutting it and put it there and then put other stones above it, which are almost equally heavy? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, there is no way we can do that. And even if we had technology to do it, we wouldn't quite know why we should do it. But the fact is that such technology requires new forms of, new for us, new forms of energy and obviously aerial transportation. Clearly, this material was levitated and put wherever it had to be put, just as some of the Egyptian obelisks, which are 200 feet tall and which weigh several hundred tons. There again, how can you move this obelisk over hundreds of kilometers? Even now, we would find it extremely difficult and costly to do it. And we are 7 billion on this planet, and we have gigantic machines. And at that time, supposedly, there were only a few million and had no machines, so it doesn't make any sense. Obviously, archaeologists have been very clever, are saying, well, we will explain it to you. We have found a way how they could have done it, but they haven't found any way at all. They are just trying to keep people believing in them, saying that they know everything and they got it all. This is crumbling now. We know that this is a complete mystery and that we cannot explain it by conventional historical accounts, which is what you are all getting in school, where you are told that about 4,000 BCE, people began to build small villages. And, you now know that the Sphinx in Egypt is probably 12,000 years old. The pyramids may be as old as that. And there are monuments in Turkey like Göbekli Tepe, which are at least 10,000 years old. So if people were able to build those things tens of thousands of years ago, and perhaps hundreds of thousands of years ago, that puts paid to the entire edifice of history telling that we have now in academic institutions. And, there is so much to be said that one can go on forever. But if you look, for example, at the matter of, as you said, there is a system which surveys, monitors and protects the planet. And that system we know is in place because every nuclear power in the world has been visited and has been tested by otherworldly craft. They have come down, checked the nuclear missiles, inspected the silos, sometimes switched off the trigger mechanisms in order to show that they could prevent the missiles from being launched. And some of the missiles have been destroyed in space by unknown spacecraft. So all that has been recorded. It has been filmed by the military. And both, all the superpowers and great powers know about it. The question is, why have they kept most of humanity in the dark? Well, because governments depend on public trust, and they do not want their citizens and others to think that they have no power over what's going on. So they prefer to hide whatever they know, and many of them don't know very much at all anyway. So it's easy for them to keep saying, well, don't worry about it. I'm sure we'll find an explanation. But the reality is much deeper. And there is no question that there are hostile intrusions, despite what you said about the Daityas not being allowed in the Kali Yuga. There are some visitors who obviously are not particularly well-meaning, and there are cases of fights in our atmosphere, which have been recorded. Some craft were shot down. And that's why we find a relatively high number of so-called UFO crashes, in the last 70 years. Because clearly when somebody is not authorized, he's probably warned to get out. And if he doesn't, he's shot down. And that is what has happened in a number of occasions in many parts of the world. We are all getting now the official reports from the Brazilian Air Force about the Virginia and many other cases where UFOs were shot down, and the Americans flew in, picked up the bodies, and brought them back to the US because of an agreement that was made in the Western Alliance that the US would be in charge of this whole thing. Of course, the Soviets kept their own council and they had their own system, but in the Western world, the Americans were in control, and the Chinese are now going very fast in this area because they have accumulated a lot of knowledge, and they have their own experiences with the sightings, crashes, and encounters. Nowadays you have almost every day pilots, both civilian and military, who are reporting very close encounters and dogfights with UFOs. And some of them are in India, they are in the Himalayas over the Kashmir region, where you have quite a lot of UFOs because there is a base under these mountains, right at the, behind Pongongso. That's where there is a deep underground base where a number of craft are obviously stationed.
Very interestingly, you say that because now, both of us are playing from two different sources, and you have done a physical research on what is the incidents on the earth. Very interestingly, Yaksh and Rakshas have been given a place in those areas. And Kuber residence, Pongso is northwest of Kailash.
Right. Yeah. And Kubera's brother was Ravana, who was in the south and had the Vimana because of that. And correct. Lord Ram got the Vimana after he went to Lanka.
Correct. And very commonly, like during Mahabharata time also, and there are, very clearly mentioned by Markandeya Rishi that Rakshasas are not allowed to attack the Manusha because there are some people who are going to control it. And since you said it's a very surprising news, I've never heard it before that these UFOs were shot down. I did not hear that before, to be honest with you. And that area is known to have these kind of influences. And then I was joking with somebody that India may not protect themselves, but Yaksh and Rakshas will definitely protect India because they rule that area. No plane flies over there. No plane has ever flown there over Tibet directly. They have to go through south or they have to go through north, but not over Tibet because that is the area which is forbidden by Kuber's armies. And also they appear and disappear at will, and they have planes also. And I know we are at the top of the hour, and we'll continue this series more. We'll continue this discussion since it's your favorite area, and I love this aspect of study. Now, only one question is there now. So when we look at the structural, which are ancient structures, all ancient structures, They are made on 8 directions. Ashtadigdarshak. That's how the word Aztec also comes from there. Ashtak means 8 directions. Now, all of them across South America, Antarctica, and unfortunately, we have given them the name pyramid so that it looks very mythological and something which is unexplained. And we have made it a tombstone. Now, tombstones, we all know that it's a traditional Vedic technique, also, other places also. The great saintly people are always given samadhi. Samadhi is given to sannyasis only, not for other people. But at the same time, we also see a lot of crematoriums also. I have saw that in with my own eyes in Pachacamac and other places in South America. In Bolivia, I've seen it. Uh, and I have also seen that the saintly people were kept in a very guarded area by the whole population so that they can practice what they are doing. And saintly people, I mean scientists also. Many of them are great thinkers. Many of them have written some things and which have been guiding people. So why, why is there, according to you, is there a fear of the UFOs nowadays, or is it a gradual acceptance that these things were not built by humans?
No, there is a gradual acceptance. Anybody who wants to know knows. Those people who have a religious problem with it and who keep trying to deny it, either because they only believe in what they learned in school, or because they believe it goes against their religious convictions. Those people will obviously keep denying it, but this is denial. Otherwise, everybody knows by now. I mean, come on, it's been in every area of the US government, the US Senate, of course, the Pentagon has been, they have now appointed a special agency, which is another way to try to delay the disclosure, because they say, no, we need to study it. We need more money and we need to spend a few years trying to understand what it is. They were saying the same thing in 1947. So not much has happened since then, apparently. But other than that, clearly the knowledge is there. Most people really prefer not to think too much about it because it worries them and it troubles them. And that's always the case for anything which is above our day-to-day level of comprehension. But we have also been brought up now for a couple of centuries, at least in the West, in a very so-called rationalistic bringing, which means that we are only supposed to believe what we are told by scientists and that we can see with our own eyes. And even what we see with our own eyes, if scientists disagree, then we're not supposed to believe in that. But eventually it's becoming known because there are just too many official reports now, and the churches have got involved. They all had to agree that something was going on. Of course, in the Christian context and the Judaic context, it's more like, well, are they angels or devils? That's a big discussion. But if you are out of the so-called monotheistic tradition, then all polytheistic religions are absolutely open and clear about the fact that there are so many different beings who can appear to be divine to us, because after all, divine is rooted in the root in div, light. So any being who is essentially a light being is a deva, a god. Divine comes from deva, and there is no real gap between enlightened humans and higher creatures. It's like a continuum in a way. So in a sense, we all partake in that supreme consciousness, but as long as we don't want to rise, we are stuck in our little world with our prejudices, and that's the sad part. But I think it's definitely changing week by week. The Pentagon is under the fire because they were supposed, as of the 31st of October, to provide a much fuller and more detailed report after what they did last year. And of course, they have still delayed it, saying, well, we may bring it out soon, but we're not quite there yet. And meanwhile, they are trying to divert attention by saying, we have found that many of those sightings are actually mistaken sightings because they are what they call space trash, or they are unknown craft coming from our own secret research facilities, or they may be Chinese drones, and so they are really trying to divert people's attention and reassure them by saying, don't worry too much about it. But of course, they have to admit that there is a hardcore of evidence which is completely unexplained and unexplainable by this kind of stories, essentially, which they are. They are just basically stories to try to keep people quiet.
Thank you so much, Carpentier, and I will we will make it a series, and for all the viewers who are watching it, don't be scared of UFOs, especially if you are reading Rama and Mahabharata. There are a lot of Americans read Rama and Mahabharata, also Europeans read it. So anyone who is reading that should actually, they are not confused at all. They accept it very well. Is the rest of the people, there is an issue, and we will also bring more experts on this area, because this is a area which also gives credence to the fact that the descriptions in Vedas of the different yugas and the heights of people very much corroborate with what is being seen now. Even in the USA, and many pyramids in the USA are hidden. Pyramids means temples. These are all temples. Any shape of pyramid means a temple.
Vedic altar also, the Vedic altars are very
Correct.
much in that same geometry and same
Same
proportions.
geometry everywhere is very common, like the circles of Nazak and all these places are very much common. Baalbek, Sumerians, these are all ancient people. And I believe, and I firmly believe that the Russia will have far more happenings like this, which are not reported, because Meru Parvat, which is known as Khan Tegri in Mongolia. It is the base of many of these devtas, and it's a place of Indra also. So there will be far more incidents over there which nobody is reporting so far, and I think that's why Mongolia is a little bit kept out of the loop by everybody else by design. So thank you so much, Com, and thank you all the viewers for watching. And we'll bring Com and we'll have more of these discussions. Namaste.
Namaskar.